And we are finished with the headline news, and now we will bring in, I'm waiting on my co-host to be right, and now we will bring in our main guest. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Dr. Ragoonath. Thank you very much for joining State of Affairs. Dr. Ragoonath, of course, we invite you here to get your opinion and for you to shed some light. TPP 15 PNM 0. Could you please shed some light on the numbers? What is the message? What does absolute power mean at this point in time?
Well, I'm not sure it's absolute power. The mere fact that we remains that, however, that there's no opposition in the assembly um, when the new assembly is appointed by and starts its business from next week. But as it stands right now, there'll be no official opposition. That does not mean to say that the opposition does not continue or the opposition doesn't exist, nor does it mean that civil society and other organizations cannot uh, hold the assembly to account for what may happen. So, for instance, I think until yesterday, I think it was the Chamber of Commerce in Tobago had said that they would be literally looking on as to what is happening in the Tobago space, and they will call on the assembly to be accountable and ensure that there's some level of good governance as we move forward. So it's not a matter of no accountability or no transparency and so on. It's a matter of how that is dealt with. We also heard on the election night where the incoming chief secretary had said that he will announce tomorrow, I think it is, strategies by which we could ensure greater good governance. Now, we know that in 2013, we had a similar situation in Tobago, where at that time the PNM had won all the 12 seats that was there, and they had approached the president because the assembly, the legislation which governs the assembly suggests that apart from those elected, there are to be appointed four councillors, four councillors. And normally, three are appointed by the chief secretary and one appointed by the minority leader. In this particular case, there is no minority leader. So the question that begs is simply whether the chief secretary is going to be the one who is going to appoint that fourth councillor, or whether the chief secretary is going, and where that person is going to come from, or whether the chief secretary may very well invite some other organization. I'm not saying the PNM. He may very well invite, for instance, the chamber or the Hotel and Tourism Association or somebody to nominate a person who chances are he will have to make the nomination as chief secretary because there's no minority leader. But at least that will give a voice to people outside of the TPP to be part and parcel of governance in Tobago. We will really have to wait and see how that plays out after tomorrow's swearing in of the chief secretary and the deputy chief secretary.
Dr. Raghunath, what does the numbers say? Because we have seen, yes, some supporters, a very small handful, decided not to vote. But at the end of the day, Fali Chavez or Augustine received an overwhelming mandate. Is there any concern with the numbers? That what we are seeing?
There are no real concern about the numbers in terms of what has transpired. What we noted is that just over 50% of the electorate would have voted. And in saying that just over 50% of the electorate would have voted in this election, this is not unfamiliar ground for the THA. In fact, in 2021, in January 2021, when they had the first THA election, just about 51 point something percent of the electorate had voted. And then when we go back to 2017, in the last THA election THA election before that, it was just around 52% of the electorate would have voted. So The 50%, just over 50% this time around, does not tell us anything significant has happened. And that is also underscored by the fact that when we look at the numbers, for instance, in the general election that we had last April, the, the voters in Tobago, just about 51% of the voters in Tobago exercised their franchise at that point in time. So um, there's no major difference in terms of the voter turnout when we talk about general election or THA election over the years. Yes, in 2021, in the second THA election, it went up to 57%, but that was simply because of a reaction to what had happened earlier in 2021. But on average, 52% of the electorate voting is normal. What the numbers tell us also is that there has been no real swing to the to from the PNM to any other party. Yes, in between 2021 and 2025, the PNM would have lost about 1,000 votes. But what we didn't also understand, what we must also understand, is that the TPP, well, then it was the PDP, but it has transferred into the TPP. The in 2021, between 2021 and 2025, the TPP would have lost about 600 votes. So if the both parties are losing votes, then it can't be that PNM people leaving PNM and going to TPP or vice versa. They both lost votes in the numbers game. So from that perspective, the number of voters is not an issue. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. The number of voters voting for each party is not an issue. The number of voters in Tobago, however, as well as in Trinidad, is an issue. In that we need now to get to that point where we political parties can either excite people to come back and participate in the electoral process, and that is what they're not doing. Because remember, if we go back to the general election in 2025, we only had 54% of the electorate voting in Trinidad and Tobago. That had dropped from 58 or 59% in 2020. And that was during an election during COVID. So less people would have gone out to vote in 2025 than they would have gone out to vote in 2020. And that is something that we have to look at as a country, as a society, as to what exactly is happening in terms of political parties attracting people to come out and participate in their democratic processes and doing their civic duties. So that's a whole big question that has to be dealt with on society wide.
Dr. Raghunath, what message are Tobagonians sending to the PNM?
Well, what the message I've sent to the PNM is that one, we are ready and willing to give the TPP another term. Now, bear in mind that the history of Tobago's politics has always been that they always give an incumbent party a second term or a third term. This has been one of the campaign issues that the TPP had used in this election was the PNM was there for 21 years. We were only there for 4 years. We need extra time to do some of the things that we wanted to do. So that's one of the messages. The second message, however, is another critical, is a more critical to the PNM, in that the question is, has the PNM been able to mobilize itself, and how should it mobilize itself to go forward? One of the challenges that the PNM had in 2025 was a challenge that an experiment that the PNM was trying with even Tobago as well as in Trinidad, and on both occasions it failed. Let me explain what I mean. In 2021, after the PNM lost the control of the assembly, the PNM insisted on keeping Ansel Dennis as its political leader, and that person was separate and apart from Kevin Morris, who was the legislative leader in the assembly. Keith Rowley attempted to do the same thing in Trinidad when he remained political leader and gave the prime ministership to Stuart Young. On both occasions, the population rejected it. The PNM has to come to terms with the fact that they have to make sure that they get their leadership issues corrected. How many leaders does the PNM have? Because as we went into this election, we had, for instance, the official PNM political leader, Penelope Beckles. We had the official Tobago Council PNM political leader, Ansel Dennis. We had the official uh, PNM Assembly minority leader in Kevin Morris. And somewhere in the background, we had Keith Rowley hanging around because Keith Rowley kept on calling press conferences and media conferences and wanted to have conversations with Tobagonians and those sorts of things, which is, apart from the PNM. So the question that begs is who is the leader of the PNM and which leader are we voting for? And the PNM has to deal with this leadership issue. Even now that we've had that election, now that the PNM has nobody in the assembly, Ansel Dennis has said he's going to demit as political leader of the Tobago Council. I'm assuming that the Tobago Council will now have the opportunity to select or elect their own new leader, who hopefully will work well with Penelope Beckles as PNM political leader overall. But I still have a concern as to, is Keith Rowley willing to say, I am no longer in the politics and let the PNM be led by its political leader? Or is he still always going to come in and jump in? And we're not sure whether he's speaking with the party's support or without the party's support. And those are the concerns that the PNM has to deal with as they move forward.
Dr. Raghunath, the PDP leader, Mr. Watson Duke, what was his impact? He decided in the late half that he was showing his support behind the TPP. Did it? Was it a good choice? Of course, in the end, the TPP won, but how much influence did it have?
Not sure how much support Watson Duke had in the whole and how much influence he had in the process, in the electoral process. What I know for a fact is that he came to the realization that he's not going to get any major support going forward, and that is why he withdrew. Now, interestingly enough, on the election night, after the polls had closed and the decision was announced that the TPP had won, Farley Augustine thanked him. Does that mean that there's some merger or some communication between Farley and Watson Duke? I don't know. I am assuming, however, that probably there was something that was offered to or will be offered to Mr. Duke as we go forward. Until such time, however, that we hear any more on that, all we could say is that Watson Duke did what he considered to be the right thing in saying that he's going to not contest the election and ask his supporters whether they will support the TPP. We really don't know what is the base of the PDP right now in Tobago. I am not sure it has a significant base, but the fact of the matter remains that Mr. Watson Duke is still the leader of the PDP, and I know that he commands some support, even if only in the Roxborough area. Beyond that, we'll really have to wait and see, but our concern right now is simply whether or not he'll be offered some position under this TPP administration in Tobago. One of the things that Farley Augustine said is that he's going to try to push for the autonomy bill. We know that when the PDP was in office, the PDP had decided that they were going to set up an office in Port of Spain to serve as that link between Tobago and Trinidad. And more importantly, to push that notion of autonomy for Tobago. Whether that will be Mr. Duke's role, I don't know. We'll really have to wait and see.
Dr. Raghunath, that was my last question. I was going to ask you, do we see autonomy? So you answered it for me. And thank you very much for taking the time out to share your expertise. And we look very forward to you rejoining us on State of Affairs very soon.
My pleasure.
Have a good afternoon, Dr. Raghunath.